our own self-publishing pipeline in terms of user acquisition and monetization. So, iteration as a general approach. Throughout my career in games, I realized that iteration, the concept of iteration, is very useful, not only in terms of game development, but also creating a game development culture. Because hyper-casual is a business model that's based on failure. So 99% of the games you are going to make are going to fail. So what does that mean? That means that you cannot focus on the game itself, because you're going to work hard, create a game that you're passionate about, and then the results will come in and players hate it. It's like very low retention, very high CPI, and nothing but kill the game. So if your mindset is on the game itself, then it might have some, it might create some problems for you. But if you are more focused on the continuous process of creating hyper-casual games, then it's about the process, it's not about the product. Because, as I said, it's built upon failures. And especially in Turkish game ecosystem, I think that's a little bit overlooked, because we are so passionate as a country. We are consists of passionate people, and that sometimes might come cross with hyper-casual mentality. So as I said, maybe we could focus on the process more and create games, but not for the sake of game, but for the sake of creating sustainable game development studios. So I would like to talk about some practical advice that through iterations we have come up with. We realize that those things that I'm going to talk about do work. And I'm going to make those points by doing a case study. This is Oops Hand Simulator. This is a game that we released in July 2021. It's a puzzle simulation game. So basically, it was released like 2 months ago, and it got promising KPIs. So we started working on it, and throughout 40 days, we had 7 iterations. Iterations consisted CPI iterations, retention iterations, and also like monetization. How can we increase the amount of rewarded ads that the players watch? So it's a simple puzzle game. The concept is that you move a hand and you do stuff with it. You pick things up, you put things down, you put keys into locks, etc., etc. And with such a simple, primitive concept, it's really easy to go anywhere, because there isn't like one distinct theme to the game. It can be simply anything, much like a VR title where you move the hands. So the controls are joystick to control the hands, and tap to pick up or drop things. Simple. And as you can see here, you pick up a pen, you dip it in ink, then you sign something, and you pass the level. You tap. Usually it works as a pickup mechanic, but in this level in particular, when you tap, like Wolverine claws come out, so there's this sense of wonder that we try to create, this sense of unexpected surprises that players might enjoy. And also like here, you pick up a toy soldier, and then it starts shooting, and when you drop every single toy soldier, you win the level. And yeah. So art style. As I said, the art style for the game, and not only this game, but as a studio, we try to create art for each and every single game, and we always look back on this process and try to iterate on it. So in this game, we had this discussion at first: should we go with a realistic art style or a simplified art style? And we haven't really done much realistic art for the games that we make, because hyper-casual is usually like simple colors and like pretty plain. But for this game, we thought that it could be eye-catching. It could be, if we could come up with some realistic textures, then I think that would be a fun thing to do, and it would maybe benefit our KPIs. So what did we do? We tested it, we iterated on it, and as you can see, here are 2 different versions of the same level. One of the levels that performed the best. And it was really a no-brainer that the realistic art style was favored by the players, because there isn't really much games that are in a realistic artistic way. And in this regard, as I said, iterations. So when we did this game, we used the Substance suite, Substance Painter and Designer, to create materials with surface imperfections on it, I'm not sure if you can see, but the fabrics have like little nets and stuff. And all that really made the game unique. And we iterated on it and tried to make it as clean and visually understandable as possible, but at the same time, it was pleasing to the players and was unique. And also, we created our custom assets, not only 3D models, but also these, you can see here, there's a little cartoon, little Japanese cartoon. You pick the plug, you pick the thing, the cord of the TV, and when you plug it, this funny cats start turning on the screen. And we realized that when we added that, instead of just TV opening up with a solid color, and the colors were changing, we realized that making those custom assets helped us improve the KPIs, and we saw it in the analytics that the game was improved much better. So custom assets is always a good idea. Our philosophy is to make things if you have the resources, if you have the time. You really should make your own assets, because it's going to put you one step forward, because like those customized assets, players see them hundreds of times each day, and sometimes they are the ones that break your game. So if you have the time, if you have the team, make your own assets. That's always a good idea. Yeah. So pre-production. Pre-production was actually the most important thing that we have understood as a studio, that it mattered, because hours that you spend in pre-production, and by pre-production I mean the period of time where the developers and the artists do not know about the game at all. Maybe it's only in the ideation phase, maybe you discussed it with your publisher and decided to give it a go. And what do? You sit down and you think about the project. What kind of libraries are you going to use? In which order are you going to implement the mechanics? What kind of art style? And those decisions doesn't have to be final in the pre-production phase. But it's always a good idea to start up front, because those hours that you put into pre-production mostly makes your development period shorter and shorter. And don't overdo it. That's another thing. Don't overdo pre-production. You should make the game to see if it works, but it's always a good idea to plan ahead. In this Oops hand simulator, we always knew that the hand was at the middle of the screen. The hand was always important, and there wasn't many options to monetize in the game, except from the interstitial ads, because there wasn't any different mechanics, no characters, no nothing. So cosmetics would play a huge part. And during the pre-production phase, we realized that and started to implement our systems in a way that if the results came in positive, then we could improve upon it. That's what I mean by scalable systems and mechanics. Because there is a million ways of implementing just one mechanic, but if you do it in a way that might work well with other systems, you might improve upon it, you might add other systems and not break the game. Those kind of things can be decided in the pre-production and implemented into the game. And as you can see here, we have like many different cosmetics, because we wanted to approach it not as a like design this mesh and like texture it and alright, it's done. Instead, we created an editor that had like places for like rings, bracelets. If it had a tattoo, it would put the tattoo on wherever you want. And we didn't implement this. We've at first made our own combination of hands and gave it to the players, like this hand. You want this hand because you played 5 levels and now it's 100% and you need to watch an ad to claim it. But then, after that iteration, we realized that having a store that you can customize your own hand would work much better. And because we did the work up ahead in the pre-production phase, it was quite easy to implement that customization mechanic. And as you can see, we have a variety of different things thanks to that state of mind. And update planning is really not that different from planning a game from the start. Because in each update you have some goals, you have some pre-made things that you already made in the previous iteration. And when you plan an update, it's always a good idea to, again, plan ahead and think about what you're going to do. A best practice that we found to be useful throughout our iterations in the last 2 years is that especially if the game has a technical aspect that you didn't do before, that you don't know how to do it, or you have some idea but you didn't do it before, it's always great to, like, for your best developer to stay late, maybe he does it in his own time, and like make a simple proof of concept. Like if it's using inverse kinematics and you didn't do inverse kinematics before, just download a model and like start working around with it. Because that will make things easier for the developer when they start it. So updates are quite similar to that. Planning updates ahead is a great thing, especially in terms of iterations. Çalışmıyor ama. Sorry. Alright, another thing that we realized was quite important for us, and what worked for us, is figuring out the communication pipeline. Because communication, especially in game development, is a huge thing. Because there is no other input than the effort of the team. Like, period. There is nothing else in the pipeline. So those members of the team need to communicate efficiently, in a way that's both efficient and in a way that feels good. Because those personal interactions are most of the time the only human interaction we get in a day. So those are the people that we see every day, that we talk to more than our families, and that communication really should feel good, because we all, as humans, need that, have that need to like communicate and be on the same level. And during OOPS, we had this huge project because, as I said, 7 iterations, and they had to be fast, so we didn't do things in order, and it was a mess. The project file was a mess. It took like minutes sometimes to find a simple asset because you didn't know the name. Some people did some things, and while we were like transferring the file, some things got lost, and really it was a mess. And we looked back on that process, and we decided that first, direct communication was important, because there is a development lead, there is an art lead, there are like founders, and all these different parts of the team. But when you have a problem that can be solved instantly with just a direct communication line between the developer and the artist, those middlemen really just make things slower and communication gets less effective. They say something, they interpret it to the other person. Instead, we have decided that from now on, guys, if you have a problem that can be solved by an artist, just give it a call. If it's working remotely, make a Zoom call. If they're right next to you, do not call your lead, call the artist, and then sit down on the same computer and figure things out. That makes things a lot faster, and also it's a great way for team members, especially new team members, to connect with the other people in the team. Another thing that we started to do after OOPS, through all those iterations, was collaborative documents. So what do I mean by that? I mean a simple Google Drive doc. That is the GDD as start. It has a summary in it, it has the mechanics, it has some, if you're going to use packs, if you're going to use a character pack, it's stated there. And everybody has a color. Everybody has a distinct color that they can choose. And everybody has the link to that in the Slack channel. So when they sit down and they work on things, they put it in there. And so that you can understand, as a developer, you can understand what your art team is working on. And also, for bug fixing, this is really a great thing, because everybody can put down the bugs that they found, and if it's something that a certain individual, for example an artist, should do, an artist can write in her own color, done, or waiting for this, or waiting for approval, etc. Whatever. It is, both in terms of this Google Drive document and the Slack workspace, I think it's great to approach it not as a messaging app, or like not just writing that you send to other people, but instead like a collaborative mind space that you can really put things, because we sometimes put inspirations in it. We sometimes put YouTube links that are sometimes funny and sometimes related, sometimes not. But yeah, it's like a mental space that the team shares, and everybody is proactively taking a role in it. In that regard, Slack is also another really important thing. I'm sure you guys are all using Slack. And in our team, after OOPS again, we iterated on the idea of having the channels for the game itself, not like art channel and development channel, but instead OOPS channel. So that in OOPS, the development team can know what's going on, what's going to take long, what's not, and yeah. Also, in projects where there are a lot of iterations, it's great to set in clear iteration goals for the team. Because sometimes, like as a developer, you have been working on this game for a month, and you are presented with the tasks and you don't know why you're doing things. You know that how to do things, but you don't know why. So we realized that it's great because we went through like 7 iterations, as I said. We found out that it worked better when we sat down with the team after a call with the publisher. We sat down with the team in the meeting room and said, alright guys, we are going to improve retention in this sprint. We are going to increase retention in this iteration, and that's all. And we are planning on this features that might improve retention. The publisher has this input, and we believe this could be a great addition to the game. What do you guys think? And when they are included in that planning process, it's really great for the product itself and also the team chemistry. Also, naming conventions. As I said, the project file was a mess, and after that we decided, all right, no more like lousy naming this like revised final model dot object, so something like that. But instead we had naming conventions that would, one, make things clear. Two, when you search in Unity, you can find the asset that you're working on. So it's always a great thing to implement into your pipelines. And also setting up micro milestones, because some tasks might be huge to grasp at first, so that while communicating with your team, it's great to have micro milestones that you can improve upon later on. Alright, data pipeline. With Oops, because most of the games, 99% of the games that we made, were simple games with no monetization in it that we killed after 1 or 2 iterations. We had some other games that we had many iterations on, but in terms of monetization, data is the key. Data is really important. And after Oops, we really decided to include a data pipeline, even if we are testing the game for the first time. Because it's simple. Once you set it up, you can implement it to other games quite easily. And Firebase is really a great tool for that. Alright, what am I going to do with data? Because I'm a developer, I don't do the publishing, I don't do. But triggering custom events. Triggering custom events is a great way of approaching your game, trying to get to know your games. Because there is this saying, nobody knows what game they are making until they actually make it. Because it really is that way. You have an idea, you plan it, you have concepts, you think about it, and you make the game and it's something completely different. It has a mind of its own. So it's really great to have custom events. Of course, we are going to trigger like level start, level end, playtime, etc., the usual things. But also having custom events for that significant mechanic that you think is important for your game, then do it. Trigger custom events and see what kind of a response you are getting from the player base. Because the player is the king, and you always need to look at what they are doing, what they think about the game. Because I'm sure you guys think about your games as great pieces of art, because I do, but that's not the case most of the time. Most of the time the players sit down and they play it for 20 seconds and they get tired of it. So it's really great to listen to your players by triggering custom events and also the other events that are quite orthodox in the industry. Remote config. Remote config is a perfect tool that we started implementing into every single project of ours since Oops and Simulator. Because you can, for example, I'm going to give an example, it would be simpler. I'm sure most of you guys know what remote config is. The levels are stacked in a way that you decide, right? When you take the build, you stack the levels, you say this level goes first, this goes second. When you attach that to the remote config, this gives you the ability to rearrange the levels remotely without the need to publish an update. For example, in our case, Oops, there was a chess level that the player was supposed to take the, I'm not sure, it was probably a rook, a chess piece, and we wanted the player to push over the shah for the king, the queen. I'm not sure what's in English, but the player was supposed to do this. But when the players saw a chessboard, they tried to play it by the rules, especially the players that knew what chess was. And that in return, they were putting the stones in place and say, all right, this is a checkmate situation, what do you want me to do? So they didn't get the level. And that created a huge churn for us. Like 30% of the players quit the game right on that level. Because we had remote config in place, we said, all right, level 15, you're not there anymore. It goes from 14 to 16. And we didn't have to publish an update for it because updates are painful. You take a build, you solve problems, you give it to Apple, Apple always finds something to not like about the build, so you iterate on it to change it, etc., etc. So remote config is really a great tool to utilize in your arsenal. Lastly, data collection. As I said, most of developers do not do anything in terms of publishing, etc. But data collection is always a good idea. Storing your data, looking back on your data, even if the game had like 2 days of testing and then you killed it, it's always great to see what exact data that you have. Because game analytics most of the time samples your data and gives you an overall value. It's not the exact raw data. And if you collect it now in your failure prototypes, I'm sure you will find a use for them later down the line, or maybe not, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm going too fast because this is kind of my last slide. Unlocking your team's potential. I mean, it's really understandable that the owners of the company will care more about the games, but that really doesn't mean to isolate your team from the creative process. First of all, personal well-being and career advancement. This is something that we value a lot because I believe it's probably the most important thing in all game development journey. Personal well-being, people might be sick, people might feel down, people might be upset, people might have family problems. And as a team, as I said, we spend time with our team members more than our family. So we, in a way, need to be there for them, and if not, at least not make things difficult. In that regard, for example, mental health is a huge issue that are most of the time overlooked. So I think all of us can think about how we can evaluate and help our team members in terms of mental health problems. And career advancement is also another good thing. It's always a great idea to sit down with your developers or your artists and say, all right, where do you see yourself in 3 years? What kind of a skill set do you want? And how can we get you there? How can we, as a team, feed off of our strong suits and develop as a family, as a community? So career advancement and having that vision, having that long-term vision, because game development is a high rotation industry. People leave companies, people go out to other companies, and it's really important to have that connection, keep that connection, and help people alongside. Ideation sessions and suggestions. We have also, through our iterations, found that ideation sessions are great not for the game designers alone, but also developers, but also artists. It's really great to have your team in a Saturday maybe, with some food, with some drinks, and maybe people can take different friends, for example, from other creative fields, from engineering. We sometimes have meetings in the office that we have a filmmaker along us, and we discuss games and ideas, and then they have input, because when you say something, you have some pre-understanding of what a game is, what a hyper-casual game is, and sometimes they are misleading. And an eye from outside is always a good idea. At least it's fun, and it's a great way to socialize. So, including your team and their social circle in your ideation sessions can be a great thing. I really like it. And be open for suggestions. That also works for us quite a lot, because, as I said, we will release an iteration, and sometimes the developer knows about the game more than anyone else. And their input is quite important in that regard. So while planning, it's always great to say, what do you think? Maybe you're not going to do what they say. Maybe they are just giving you very bad suggestions. But if you get this magic in one of those suggestions, then it's a great thing. And lastly, postmortem meetings. This is also a byproduct of Oops, Hand Simulator. we were thinking about it, and afterwards we said, all right, we need to definitely do that because we learned so much along the way. And what I mean by postmortem meetings is we have a lot of games. We produce many prototypes in a month, and they can be tiring. They can be like, you want to get it over with. I know, I've been there. It's really sometimes gets on your nerves. But when you get bad results from a game, for example, is it really the best idea to put it in the market and go through a marketing test? And if the KPIs are bad, let's just forget about it and move on to the next project. Of course you're going to move on to the next project. But like looking at that game retrospectively, I believe is a great idea. We like once in 2 weeks, once a week sometimes, depends on the production cycle. We sit down in the meeting room and say, all right guys, we finished the game, oops. And what went wrong? And somebody says, we thought this would be the case, but as we went into the production, things changed and we realized it wasn't. Or somebody else says, we had this kind of problems while doing this technical stuff. And somebody else says, the art style didn't really work. And also the good stuff, because talking about the good stuff is great. Because most of the time what you remember is the good work that you put in that project. So it's really great to have a retrospective point of view in terms of your prototypes and talk about them, and always iterate on your culture, iterate on your way of working, iterate on your pipeline to get the best out of the next games. Like this has been a very informative conference. There was a lot of great presentations, and they always said, all right, you're going to make a lot of games and most of them will not see the day of life. So if we are going to go with that failure all the time, and sometimes one success to compensate all of them, then we need to learn not from the success, but from the failures, because that's all we have. So that postmortem meetings are a great way to approach retrospectively to the games that we make, what did we make right, and what did we do wrong, and iterate your pipelines in that regard. And like, speaking from personal experience, those meetings always end well. Everybody leaves with a smile on their face. It's really like remembering high school. It's remembering a past project that you worked on it, and yeah, pretty much that. And here's my contact info. As I said, we're in Ankara. If you're ever in Ankara, or I know there are many studios in Ankara, I would love to connect. Just like hit me up. You can also visit our website and visit us in our office. Thank you very much. I can take questions.
Right, Lider, thank you. Any questions for Lider?
First of all, thanks for your speech. I'm gonna ask, you said that you use Substance Painter for textures, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't it too expensive for a mobile game? How doesn't the game crash?
Yeah. So most of the time we don't use Substance textures, and definitely not every single map that you can export from Substance. In this game, can I get the presentation back up for a little while? So like, okay. So this, for example, this is a marble texture. Is it expensive? Yes, it's expensive, but in this game, we talked about it during the pre-production phase, about how the game would be limited to a physical space, which is like a meter to a meter. It would be quite small. And at one time, we are going to see very limited amount of objects. Most of them will not move. There's physical collisions and stuff, but most of them will stay put. The table, the background will stay put. And we realized that we could be a little bit more generous in terms of our texturing budget. And we use albedo maps, the base maps that we export from Substance. So in that regard, it's really nothing different from usual Unity textures. We at first thought about having normal maps as well, which was like every single asset in the first iteration had normal maps. Later on, we saw that was not working, especially in a game of our scale, because, as I said, we went through a lot of iterations and the project file got bigger and bigger. And in terms of performance, normal maps are usually, not always, but usually not a good idea to include in your games. Using Substance Painter and Designer, we actually textured them and exported only the base map in the end. So it really didn't affect our performance that much. And it's really fun to use those software packages as well.
Thank you so much.
Any other question?
You said that you made a lot of iterations, so my question is, how much do you spend for each iteration?
Yeah, so it depends. It depends on the iteration, of course. Sometimes it's a CPI iteration, and you, with a developer and 2 artists, you put together an iteration in 3 days. Sometimes it is you need to implement store, you need to implement 20 more levels, and it takes a week, maybe a week and a half. So it really depends on the scope of the iteration. But on average, I can say that it's around like 4 days to a week, something like that, I believe.
My other question is, do you use any version control systems like Git
Version control systems?
during the development process?
Oh,
Like
you mean
Git.
Unity version?
Yes, version control.
Okay, we use the long-term support, lifetime support LTC version of 2020. Last year we were using the LTC of 2019. That is also a great thing. It's always great to keep your project as a single version throughout the development, because that upgrading your version is always a bad idea. It produces so much headache. So we have the LTC version, long-term support version, which is more stable. And every year, Unity releases 2021 LTC package. In next year, they are going to release 2021 LTC, and we are going to switch to that. We do it once a year, every time the LTC version comes up, and we try not to change it too much because it produces a lot of headaches.
Any other questions? All right then, thank you, Lider.